I grew up with very high crime area, and unfortunately, my mom became an addict. That was a tough time for me, seeing her battling those demons on a day in and day out. You learn a lot more from failure than you do from success. There's things that can pull you off course, being involved in things that you shouldn't be involved in. I always just told myself, like, I'm not gonna be that guy. But for me, it's just minimizing those distractions and removing yourself from them as quickly as possible. How hard are you willing to fight for it, and are you a person who's going to exhaust every resource possible to get there?
This is the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast, where we are here to educate, equip, and inspire people to build extraordinary companies. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get updates every time we drop a new episode. Now let's get it started. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. My name is Rick Meekins. I am your host as usual. And in our studio, we have Freddie Owens. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, man. Doing great. Excited to be here and I appreciate you having me on.
For sure. I'm excited to do this show. This is going to be absolutely amazing. Your journey is going to be one that people are just going to be sitting on the edge of their seats going,
yes, sir.
All right, fantastic. And folks, we would love it if you would like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get updates every time we drop a new episode. And without further ado, let's get to it. So, Freddie, give our audience a little bit of taste of who you are, what you do, why you do it.
All right, who I am. All right, I am a father. I am an author. I am a coach, husband, and the oldest of 10, originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And, you know, basketball has sort of been the center of my life up until, you know, my son was born and I got married. And yeah, man, it's been quite the journey. You know, coming out of the inner city of Milwaukee, been around the game of basketball as long as I can remember, you know, walking to the different local parks throughout the city with my dad and watching him play and, you know, me dribbling the ball on the sideline. And, you know, it just became something that turned into a passion as I got older. I've been able to sort of ride the wave and play the game that I love playing. And it's taken me to some great places throughout the world. And I've been able to experience a lot of cool things and meet a lot of cool people and build a lot of important and strong relationships. So, yeah, man, I, was able to get out of the inner city of Milwaukee, area that was, you know, pretty high crime and, you know, a lot of poverty, and was able to sort of forge a path for myself by getting a full scholarship to play at our state school, the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Nice.
And yeah, man, it's just a dream come true. I was able to play in front of 17,000 fans every home game and travel the world, and career took me over to Europe to play professionally. And then after my playing days were over, got into coaching. Was able to stay close to the game and impact youth and, you know, just be around the game and see it from a different lens, you know, as far as how life and sports kind of intersect and, you know, having to be resilient and fight through things and figure things out. And yeah, man, I'm just blessed. So, you know, after coaching for 20 years, my wife got pregnant with our first and only kid. And, you know, for me, it was like, all right, you know, it was time to make a pivot. Being in the coaching world, and you don't have a lot of time to yourself or a lot of time to spend around family because the profession demands, you know, a lot of your time. So I got out of coaching because I didn't want to miss those milestone moments with my son and my wife and my family. And I got into teaching, which is what I'm currently doing. I'm a high school PE and health teacher at one of the high schools here in town, and enjoying every bit of it because it's keeping me around the youth. I'm able to pass on life lessons and knowledge and also learn from them. And it's just been a very rewarding experience to continue to be in a situation where I'm a coach / teacher, mentor, and just being able to have an opportunity to pour back into the youth and try to help them become the best versions of themselves.
I love that. You know, it's interesting in terms of almost a stigma, you know, you coming from the inner city and, you know, being a rough area, and then, you know, to rise to where you are right now. The question I have for you has to do with values. I'm curious about the values that were instilled in you as a young person that enabled you to just keep pushing forward. I mean, you've had 4 careers, you've got, you know, your family, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're, you know, someone that people ought to look up to.
Yeah, I mean, those values, you know, that foundation is huge. You know, and I talk a lot about that in my book, just having that base foundation, right? It's like when you have a house, the foundation has to be strong for that house to have longevity
Yeah.
and you know, a good foundation to stand on. So, you know, although I was from a rough area and faced a lot of trials and tribulations and trauma and things like that,
Yeah.
I had a great base and a great foundation of people around me, starting with my parents, my mom and dad, who were teen parents. My mom was pregnant with me when she was 16, my dad was 17, and although they were very young and we didn't have much, the foundation was love.
Hmm.
That's where everything started from and expanded out. So there was never a moment growing up that I didn't feel love and didn't feel appreciated. And I think a lot of that, helped shape and mold me into the man that I am today.
Mm, mm. Basketball. I played a lot of basketball, a lot of pickup games and that sort of thing growing up. How did that turn into something again that's kind of pouring into who you are and the way that you operate?
It gave me sort of an anchor. It gave me something to hold on to, especially in those tough times, and something to move towards as far as setting goals. At a very young age, I knew I wanted to become a pro basketball player and a college basketball player, and it just gave me something to hold on to and set goals for myself. Even through the tough times. The game. I tell people all the time, the game is a teacher of life, like with any sports, right? It's a teacher of life, and it helps set those foundational pieces, and it puts things into place for you to be successful if you use the resources and the tools in the correct manner.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always think about like the discipline, getting up and doing it every
Yeah.
day. I know I'm not the only person in the room, but I remember going to the course and shoveling the snow because we were playing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Man, I can remember it like it was yesterday. You're trying to shoot buckets with gloves on, and
Yeah.
it's just like, man, you think back and it's just like, wow, like I really did that. Like, but it just goes to show you, when you have something that you're working and striving towards, nothing's gonna get in the way, not even, 6 inches of snow.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Walk it. Don't forget the part where we walk to the court.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That too. Yeah.
I'm glad you can feel that. Excellent. The one of the big things that you talk about is resilience, and resilience is, in my opinion, it's a muscle, something that you develop. Over time. We don't develop resilience when the road is smooth. You know what I'm saying? We develop resilience, as we go through stuff, and we learn how to, get back up over and over again. What were some of the things that fed into your resilience training?
There was a lot of things that fell into it. My environment was one of them. I moved, my family and I and family, me and my parents, we moved 10 times before I was the age of 14. So there was a lot of instability, a lot of unknowns, and just a lot of question marks on, what was going to happen from one day to the next. So, being in that situation, in that environment on a day-to-day basis, surrounded by drugs and crime and things of whatnot, I learned early to observe and watch my surroundings, watch the
Yeah,
people around me, watch the things that they were into and the things that they were doing. And, for me, unfortunately, a lot of people were going left. And, I knew I had goals that I had set for myself, and I wanted to sort of break the mold, so I always tried to veer right when everybody else veered left. And, although people went through different things in their lives, as far as, making mistakes or making, the wrong decisions, I tried to learn from their experiences as well, even though I wasn't directly affected by it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, what's a story that just stands out in your mind? It's like, hey, you know what? Everybody is, doing X. I need to do Y because this is who I am and I know where I'm going.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories. Actually, one that comes to mind is being on the park one day playing basketball, and a guy that I was pretty close to, was doing some things, that he shouldn't have been doing, as far as selling drugs and getting into sort of the life of crime. Now, mind you, I'm 15 years old, 14, 15 years old at the time, and we're in the middle of a game, summertime game, and we're having fun and competing, and next thing you know, 4 or 5 squad cars pull up, and bunch of different cops, they get out of the squad cars, they rush onto the court, and we all freeze not knowing what's going on, and they grabbed my friend and, kinda took him away in cuffs. And,
Uh,
for me, it was just like a wow moment, because, at any given time, things can change, especially if you veer off to that left road, where it can lead to, you being involved in things that you shouldn't be involved in. So,
yeah.
I always just told myself like I'm not going to be that guy, and not only that, I had the family and the support system to make sure I stayed in line and didn't go that
Yeah.
route.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's I hear that over and over again. It's that, the family. You're the oldest of 10, which I think is which is remarkable. I'm the oldest as well, but I've only got two siblings. Well, and it's what keeps crossing my mind is that leadership, that's kind of put on us. They're always looking to us, and it's like, hey, what is he doing? How should I do things, et cetera, et cetera. What were some things that you learned in terms of leading, your siblings, and things that perhaps they picked up from you, that perhaps set them on the right path as well?
Yeah. The main thing I learned was that there's always someone watching,
Yeah.
and my dad used to always say that to me, whether you're talking about opportunities or, someone who may look up to you that you have no idea, So the goal is to always try to set a good example, because there's somebody always watching. As a kid, I was always watching my dad because that's who I looked up to. And, he was doing things the right way to set an example for me that had a huge impact and influence on me and my growing up into becoming a man. So,
Mm,
to answer your question as it relates to my siblings, there's a huge age gap with most of them. So I was always under their mindset that they're watching everything that I do. They're listening to everything that I say. So I need to try to set a good example and, create a path that they can follow in a positive way to achieve whatever it is that they have set for themselves. So, and looking at it now, a lot of them are, grown and, in their mid 20s and late 20s. And to see the life that they've carved out for themselves up to this point has been pretty fulfilling. And, I have a lot of gratitude in that, because I know that they were watching everything that I was doing, when they were younger and they tell me that. So,
mhm, mhm.
just actions speak louder than words. You can say one thing, but at the end of the day, what model are you putting out for an example for people that are looking up to you for advice?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. But besides your parents, did you have other role models that you were looking to?
Yeah, man, I was lucky, man. There was just so many people that played a part, whether large or small, in my upbringing and influencing the things that I did
Mhm,
growing up. I had a lot of different coaches, a lot of different athletes and even friends. My core group of friends, there were three of, and we did everything together. I mean, we did everything together, man. And even those guys, like there was just so many positive role models and influences for me when I was growing up that helped make life a lot easier in a tough environment.
mhm.
The old saying is true. It takes a village. It takes a village, and that's when I look back on my upbringing and childhood. That's exactly what it was. It was a village.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What I was thinking about was, you're the first person to go to college, and it's like it's new territory. Suddenly you're exposed to a much larger group of people, much more diverse group of people, and you felt like you could be successful. Where did that come from?
It just came from an inner belief, in myself and the things that I had been through leading up to that point.
Mhm,
Like when I got to campus, in Madison, and it wasn't many people who looked like me, like,
mhm,
I'm one of a few black students on campus, and, those students were mostly athletes, the other students, so for me, it was uncharted territory because coming out of the inner city of Milwaukee, I hadn't had much interaction with anybody who looked different, than me or had a different background or upbringing, than I had, even though I was involved with sports. So when I stepped foot on that campus, I was ready for all of the challenges that waited for me because of all of the things that I had been through and building that resilience piece and falling down and getting knocked down and constantly getting back up. Learning from things that happened to me and moving forward. And I was ready. I was ready for everything when I got on campus. And, I thank God that I went through all of the things that I went through, even though a lot of it was ugly,
mhm, mhm,
because it just helped prepare me to be able to deal with the rigors of, being on a college campus that was predominantly white. And not only that, being a student athlete and trying to balance, being an athlete and a student and, all of the challenges that came with it. So, I went in. ears open, eyes wide, and ready to take on whatever was coming for me.
Yeah, yeah, I feel you. It's always interesting, when you reflect back, when you were going through these difficult times, you had to learn how it was terrible, right? It's just like,
Yeah,
why is this happening to me? Or,
yeah,
I gotta, get up again, or, whatever it is. But then you get to the point where you look back and you go, wow, if I didn't go through that, if I didn't experience that, then I wouldn't be where I am right now. And I wouldn't
yeah,
be teaching, where you are. It's like I wouldn't be teaching other people how to keep going by
yeah,
example versus by theory. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that's just so much more powerful.
Yeah, and it is too. And, I even think like, when I say I went through a lot of stuff, I'm being very vague, but just to give you an example and, open myself up a little bit, I grew up with, very high crime area. I've seen, people get murdered. I've seen drug deals. You're talking about the peak of the crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s. And unfortunately, my mom became an addict, a drug addict. So, there were times where I would see her in the neighborhood, looking for her next score of drugs while I'm on the basketball court playing. And, you talk about something that cuts you at the core of your soul. That was a tough time for me, in a sense of being a kid, seeing his mom go through, that experience and seeing her battling those demons on a day in and day out
Yeah.
basis was really tough and troubling for me. And, I just thank God that I had something to hold on to as far as friends and other family and, the game of basketball because, without those things, I don't know what I would have done, when dealing with that at that point in my life.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I'm so sorry, that that was your experience. Where did your faith foundation come from?
Yeah. I mean, God, for one. Just having that belief that, you know, these things, although they suck, they're happening for a reason. They're
Yeah.
happening to build me for what's to come, so that when I get in certain situations in life, because life throws us all curveballs. I don't care, where you're from. You can be from a very wealthy background or a very poor background. You can be white, black, orange, green. It don't matter. Life is gonna come at you and it's gonna throw a curveball at you. And the difference between people who are able to move past it and who sort of get stuck in neutral are the ones who embrace what's happening to them, whether it's good or bad, and more importantly, learn from it. And be able to move on. Through the grace of God, that was my foundation was God, and my relationships with my family and friends. That's where I drew inspiration from, and that's how I was able to overcome a lot of things that were thrown at me.
Mm, mm, mm. It's remarkable. I hear that, over and over again. People, talking about how the relationship with God gave them that grounding through, very, very difficult situations.
Yeah. It is unbelievable how far faith can carry you. Like it's unbelievable. And you hear the miracle stories, on a daily basis if you're paying attention. There's miracles happening every day,
Yeah.
because people just have that unwavering faith, that they're going to get through whatever it is that life presents to them in that moment, and they keep that faith and that belief and that hope, and things eventually turn. It's all in the energy, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. 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 Continuing to put one foot in front of the other.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
What was it important? I mean, you went to college, played in front of tens of thousands of people. You met lots of people, you had lots of situations that popped up. What was a standout moment for you in terms of a life lesson, something that, may have altered your trajectory or just gave you like a download that you knew you wouldn't get any other way?
Well, there was two things that stand out for me. The first is when somebody made an attempt on my life when I was in high school. Yeah, I'm sitting in a parked car. My stepmom at the time had, she would pick me up from school every day after practice, and then we would go and pick up my younger brothers and sisters from daycare, and then we would all head home for dinner.
Hmm.
Well, one fall afternoon, late afternoon, she picked me up from school, same routine that we do every day.
Hmm.
I'm sitting in the car. She runs in to grab them, and a car pulls up alongside of me. I look to my right, and there's an arm hanging out the window and a revolver pointed right at my face.
Oh my gosh.
And I see two flashes come out of the gun. I ducked below near the front panel,
Mhm.
up under the front by the steering wheel, and I hear three more shots ring out, and the car speeds off. And I get out of the car, I run into the house, tell my stepmom and her sister at the time, who used to babysit my brothers and sisters while we were at school and work.
Yeah.
I explained to them what happened. And long story short, we call the police. They show up, investigate. And in their investigation, they see, they pull a bullet hole from the outside panel of the car by where my head was.
Mhm.
And the bullet was stuck in there. And they say if it was a newer model car, that I probably would have gotten shot in the head.
Wow.
So that was the first moment where it was like, okay. And then the second is it's a complete 180 of this story is when I met the president of the United States, Barack Obama. Michelle Obama's brother, Craig, is a big mentor of mine. We're very, very close friends, and I was able to build a relationship with him because when I was coaching, I worked for him at Oregon State when he was the head coach.
Okay.
When I worked for him at Oregon State, he set up a tour for us, our team, to visit the White House because we played Maryland out in D.C. during that time. And we went and had a private tour of the White House. And we get to the Oval Office. And what do you know? Michelle and Barack Obama are right there to greet us. And, just shaking both of their hands. They're calling me by my first name. They know exactly who I am
Mm.
through Michelle's brother. It was an outer body experience, man, because I started reflecting in that moment, thinking about like all of the things that I had been through up to that point.
Mhm.
And here I am shaking hands with the president and the first lady of the United States who were calling me by my first name. And it was just a cool experience, because, at that moment I'm thinking like I'm not supposed to be here. And here I am, through the grace of God. So
Yeah.
no, it was just, it was just a really cool experience. But, to answer your question, those are the two things for me that really stand out.
What'd you learn from each of those circumstances?
The first one, when somebody made an attempt on my life, I learned that you cannot take a day for granted.
Mhm.
You have to live in the moment. You have to cherish every moment because it could be your last.
Mm.
We are all on a time clock, and none of us know when it's going to stop. So for me, going through that experience was terrifying. Don't get me wrong. I'm 17 years old, and that happens to me. It's terrifying, but it also forced me to put things into perspective at a very young age that I might not have thought about until I was a lot older. And then the second story, meeting the president and the first lady, for me, it was the learning experience was that no matter what you go through, there's always light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
There's always light at the end of the tunnel. And, we all have opportunities to make something of ourselves. It's just a matter of how hard are you willing to fight for it. And are you a person who's going to exhaust every resource possible to get there?
Hmm. It's interesting. They kind of sound related. I think about, when you have that moment, where you're just like, hey, you know what, I need to make the most of every moment. Suddenly that drive, increases.
Yeah.
Just like I'm gonna try this thing, I don't know if I can do it or not, but I'm gonna do it anyway because what else? Right?
Right, right. Yeah, definitely. And we're all guilty of it, right? You put things off sometimes.
Hmm.
I'll wait till tomorrow, I'll
Yeah.
wait till next week, or even if it's something that you kind of fear doing, you kind of stay away from it because you're afraid to fail. But it's like, at the end of the day, what is failure? What is failure? You learn a lot more from failure than you do from success. So, to my listeners, why not? Just go for it. Go for it. If you fail, get back up and try again, because you hear the stories all the time. People fail so many times before they're able to achieve something great. So why wait? Why wait? None of us is promised tomorrow. Whatever you're thinking about doing or thinking about achieving, as far as goals that you have set for yourself, just do it now. Don't wait. Don't wait. And don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah. Yep. 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 Awesome. 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 I'm thinking about you picking up and heading across the pond again. Another experience. You're going out there, to another country. Probably, I don't know. You probably the first in your family to do that. Is that right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
so whole other world. First of all, what gave you the courage to do that?
Yeah, just chasing the game that I loved playing,
Yeah.
and also seeing it too as an opportunity to learn from other cultures and be thrusted into that environment that otherwise I may not have gotten another opportunity to do that, you know? So, for me, I looked at it as an opportunity to continue to learn, immerse myself in a completely different and opposite culture than what I'm used to. And, when I went over there and when I came back, I was definitely a changed man. And I went over when I went over there, I went over to Eastern Europe too. So I was near Russia
Hmm.
and Ukraine. So, the way of life over there is completely different than Western Europe, where Western Europe is more, especially at the time, was more kind of like America,
Hmm.
where Eastern Europe, those are old Soviet bloc countries,
Hmm.
who were not far removed from, war. And, it was just a completely different lifestyle and a completely different cultural experience than what I was even expecting. But, it was definitely an experience that, helped me. And, when I got back from Europe, it was like there's not a room that I can walk in where, I would feel uncomfortable because, I've experienced just about every life situation that you can as far as being around different types of people from, different walks of life. And it was able to provide me with the ability to adapt in any room that I enter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's powerful. That's powerful. It's interesting. I traveled, a bit as well, and I would absolutely have to. I can appreciate that. It's like especially when you make these connections and you don't really even speak the language.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's the
yeah,
coolest thing. And then you
yeah, it
discover
is.
it's like we all need the same things.
Right.
We got
Yeah,
to
and
eat.
what it yeah, and what it made me realize too was that, yeah, we're all different in a lot of ways, but
Mhm.
we're not all that different either.
Exactly.
We're
Exactly.
not all that different. But no, man, it was an amazing experience, like just the culture, the food, the architecture, just the way people go about their lives. It just gave me a greater appreciation for, things that I have and things that I'm able to do. One thing that stood out to me when I went over there, I remember we had a tournament in the Ukraine in Kiev, which is war is going on over there now, but
Yeah.
unfortunately. But when I was over there, I remember on our ride from the airport to the hotel, we passed through this really rough stretch as far as the neighborhood, and I mean you could see people on the side of the road selling beans and selling just whatever they could to try to make ends meet for their family to support themselves and their family. And it just gave me that moment gave me a lot of perspective because I started relating it to how I grew up.
Right.
And I said, man, here I am, thinking that I didn't grow up with much, but there's always someone doing worse, like this doesn't compare, like how I grew up doesn't compare to what these people are going through. And then
Right.
it just gave me a lot of gratitude and in how I grew up. And, it just gave me a different perspective, going forward that, although you may be going through something, there's someone that's doing probably a lot worse than you are in that moment. Now that doesn't mean you minimize what you're going through, but there is someone doing worse. And, it kind of gave me a mentality to think like glass half full.
I love that that you said it doesn't minimize what you're going through. That's always the thing. I get frustrated sometimes when you say, "Well, at least you're not blah blah blah." It's like, but
Yeah, yeah,
I have different capabilities and capacity. I mean, I should
yeah.
be, whatever that is. I think that's such a powerful statement. You mentioned gratitude. Gratitude, in my mind, is a big deal. It is something that changes your thinking, your perspective, even how you go about things. How does gratitude play into your overall life playbook?
It's everything, because especially, the environment we live in today, you can kind of get caught up in wanting more all the time, which is fine. It's fine to want more,
Hmm.
but it's also wise to reflect and have gratitude for what you have in that moment, and I just think that that's very important because we all work hard, no matter what profession we're in, no matter how big or small our paychecks are, most people, like, we're all working hard to support life, to support our lifestyle and support people who depend on us as well, whether it be kids or parents or, spouse, so I just think it's important to always, try to reflect and have gratitude for where you are and what you have in that moment because, there has to be some sense of appreciation for everything that you went through to get to this point in your life. So, I just never, I try to never have a day that goes by where I'm not appreciative for what I have in my life, with my wife and my son and, the things that, we've been able to accomplish as a family up to this point. It just gives you a positive sort of point of view on things. And it also can not force you, but it also can inspire you to achieve to want more, which is not
Mm,
a bad thing.
mm.
So yeah, it's just the world we live in, we're all guilty of it. We can lose sight of that, but every now and then, it's important for me at least to just sit back and appreciate, what I do have. Because, as through my experiences, it can be taken away from you at any given moment.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love that. I love that. You went through a couple of life altering changes. You're going from playing pro ball, overseas to becoming a coach, and then going from becoming a coach to becoming a father. I mean, we could look at it from a financial perspective. It changed. But this is really an identity change. I the last time I went, and this is a bad story. Last time I went out to play basketball, I was 30 something years old, and I got on the court and they said, "Are you here to be the coach?" And then that hurt me. It was it stripped my identity completely. But this is your show. What's your story?
Man. Oh, I got a funny one for you. That moment hit me one day when and we'll get back to the fatherhood part, but that moment hit me one day. I was in practice, and this was, probably 5 years ago. I got out of coaching 3 years ago when my son was born. So this is about 5 years ago. It's on the tail end, and especially as a former athlete, man, we think we're invincible. Athletes, we all think we're invincible, especially when we get older. We think in our minds that our bodies can still do what it did 25 years ago when
Mhm.
that's not the case. So we're in practice one day, and one of the guys, our team is scrimmaging, and they take a shot, and the ball gets stuck in between the rim and the backboard. And back in the day, I can get up and get that. I can get up there and pluck it out, and I could jump pretty high back in the day with no problem. Well, I went to attempt to do that. And yeah, it didn't go so well.
I
And
hope you
that
didn't
was
hurt
my
yourself,
aha
man.
moment. Yeah, that was my old man moment. And I mean, everybody just died laughing. And, in one of the film sessions, the coach that I worked for at the time, he showed it on film. And, it was hilarious, man. I see you're in tears over here.
I am, man. I am. I knew where the story was going. I'm just like, oh no.
Yeah, yeah. And it was just one of those things where I'm like, oh, man, how embarrassing. So needless to say, I've been sticking to shooting jumpers in the driveway by myself,
Yeah.
from that moment on. But with fatherhood, man, it definitely changes you. My wife and I, we waited to have kids because we moved 10, we had 10 states covered in 17 years. In my first 17 years of coaching, we moved 10 different times, 10 different states, and we held off on having a kid because of the rigors of coaching. So, when I got the job, that was my last college job, we moved back to the state of Wisconsin, which is where we're both from, and we decided it was time to put some roots down and start a family. And the moment that my son was born, I mean, it changed everything, man. Just like my world was turned upside down in a good way. And all these years I had been consumed with myself and trying to make sure I was good and, make sure my wife was good. And now here's this little human being who comes from both of us who we are responsible for, and it made me really pivot and realize that, man, out of all the jobs that I've had and careers, like this is the most important career right here. Making sure that this little fella grows up with all of the foundational knowledge and love and values and things that can help him be as successful as possible. And more importantly, to be a good person, because
Mm,
that's the foundation of it all, to just be a good person at the end of the day. So, right now, that's where my world centers around, man. It's about, my son and my wife and my family and everything else is sort of on the exterior, and that's why, me writing this book, was so important because I wanted to get it all on paper for my son. When he gets old enough, he can have something to look back on and there'll be very few questions on what it was like for his old man growing up.
mm,
For me, both of my parents are passed. They were, and they both died young. And as a middle-aged man, I have a lot of questions that I can't get answered now.
yeah.
So for me, like I don't want that for my son, and I want to leave a legacy for him to kind of, build up on and know where he comes from and know all of the important people that played a factor in helping his dad be the man that he sees before him today.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so excellent, creating that legacy. I wanna talk about the book a little bit more, in both from the perspective of what a reader would get out of it, and also, what you wanted to really pour of yourself into the book that really makes it a powerful experience, for the reader.
Yeah. Well, I want the reader to be able to reflect. We've been talking a lot about reflection and life in general. Like, I want whoever reads the book to be in a position where they're forced to think and reflect and peel back the layers of who they are and where they come from. No matter whether it's a young high school kid trying to figure, his or her life out, or whether it's a middle-aged man that's, my age, that's trying to figure some things out, and trying to get through tough times. I just want people to be able to read the book and peel back layers of who they are and where they come from and where they're headed.
Yeah.
Because that reflection piece is huge. Life gets in the way. You're busy, trying to chase, your career and, and goals and things of that nature. But, being able to sit back and reflect on the life that you've lived and the life that you want to continue to live is important. And then that legacy piece, I want people to think, when I'm dead and gone, what's my legacy going to be? What are
Mhm,
people going to remember me by?
mhm,
Are they going to remember me as being a positive person who, poured into others, trying to bring others and lift others up, or it can go the other way too. Am I going to be a person that people didn't really get along with or people didn't like? So for me, just being able to kind of unveil some things and some thoughts that people may not take the time to think about, as it relates to their life and their legacy.
mm, mm, mm. And about you pouring yourself into this. I mean, that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's an experience in and of itself. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
what
I
was that?
mean, I definitely had to dig deep, when I decided to write the book, and there was a lot of feelings that I had buried for 30 plus years. The story
Imagine.
I gave you about my mom being an addict and, a lot of the things that we went through as a family and I went through as a kid and things that I've seen and experienced growing up. Like, that was stuff that I hadn't thought about in 30 plus years. And now all of a sudden I'm writing a book and those feelings are coming back to the surface, and with writing it, I experienced pretty much every emotion possible, in writing the book. And it was very therapeutic for me because it was a lot of things that I had buried deep that I didn't address that I was able to address through writing. And now, it feels like a 1,000 pound boulder has been lifted off my back, with some of the things, now that I've written the book.
Wow, wow, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. What is the is there a what's the name of the book, first of all?
The book is called Echoes of Stark Park. It's the park that I grew up on growing up. And I mean, I tell people all the time that park pretty much saved my life, because whenever I was faced with some things that I needed to get through and work out. I always went to the park. It was right around the corner from my house. And, I would always be out there working on my game and trying to strive to be the best that I can be, with the game of basketball. And whenever I stepped in between those lines, everything else that was happening outside of the lines just didn't matter that much, like it allowed me a safe space to go and escape, the things that I was going through at that time. So yeah, the book again is Echoes of Stark Park. And yeah, it's just that park is sort of the theme of my life because a lot of growing up was done at that park. I grew up a lot sooner than most people have to, but it was necessary.
Mhm, mhm. And the book is available on Amazon or
Yep. Yep. So the book is available on all major platforms, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart, any major brand,
nice.
any major retailer is carrying the book.
Nice, very nice, very nice. And you're doing speaking engagements as well, right?
So the topic is legacy. There's three different topics that I talk about as it relates to the book. The first one is legacy. At the end of the book, I created a sort of a workbook that talks about the different phases of life. The first being the foundation, the second being, that you're building towards something, the third being the discovery of who you are, and then the fourth piece, that final piece being legacy. So the workbook in the back of the actual book helps readers sort of peel back those layers like I talked about earlier. And then based on the questions that I ask as it relates to where you are in your journey,
Mhm.
that'll give you an idea of where you are in relation to to your roadmap to legacy. That's what I call it. And with the ultimate goal of being in that legacy space when you get older, where you're pouring into others and you're trying to bring others along and help them be the best versions of themselves. So the three different topics: legacy is the first. The second is when the game ends. So this relates to, it can be career related, companies, you're getting ready to retire, or it can be related to sports when the game ends, and just talks about I'll talk about making that transition in life, because life is transitions. And, unfortunately for a lot of people, if they've been doing something for so long and they have a life transition thrown at them,
Hmm.
it's really hard for them to make that adjustment, so that's the second topic, talking about how to deal with that. And then the third topic is the player coach relationship. Now, that's not just related to sports either. It's related to business as well, in work environment, people, because, at the end of the day, especially career wise and in a work environment, most people answer to somebody, right? Unless you
Hmm.
got your own business, which is great, but then you still have to answer to yourself, right?
Hmm.
But, the player coach relationship is another topic. And that just talks about sort of building that bridge and creating an environment where the relationship between the player and the coach is where it needs to be, so that everybody can be successful in whatever role that they play within the company or within a team.
I have a question for you. The name of the show, of course, is the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast.
Hmm.
People can generally define winning in whatever way they want to. The hard part sometimes is that relentless pursuit. We talked a little bit about resilience. What is your offering, or what would you share with our audience about how to, or ways they can maintain that relentless pursuit?
Yeah. One of the main things that I think is that blocking out the outside noise
Mm,
and staying focused on the goal. There's a lot of distractions out there, and depending on who you are, I mean, there's distractions for everything, right? There's things that can pull you off course and sort of deter like your road and where you're headed if you let it.
yeah.
So for me, it's just minimizing those distractions and removing yourself from them as quickly as possible. Because if you have things that you're trying to achieve, you can't let anything get in the way.
Mm,
You have to sacrifice whatever it is that you need to sacrifice in order to get to where you want to be, depending on what that is. And,
mhm.
for me, I'm a living example of that. I'm not saying I got it all figured out, but I've been through some pretty crazy situations to get to this point in my life. And, when you talk about winning and success, like for me, it's defined, in different ways. For me, it's just being happy.
Mhm. Mhm.
Winning and being successful is being happy with where you are at that point in your life, whether it's emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally, whatever the case,
Mhm.
and I'm in a place where I wake up every day, considering all the things that I've been through. I wake up every day and I'm genuinely happy of where I am, and being present and being in that moment, so for me, that's what happiness and success is for me. That's what winning and that's what success is for me. Just being genuinely happy with what I have and where I am at that point in my life. So hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Remove distractions and
Yep.
define
Yep.
winning for yourself. That's beautiful. We talked really briefly about a giveaway for our audience that we're going to put together.
Yeah. So we'll be having a giveaway. The key is in order to get the giveaway, you'll have to log into the show notes to get sort of the information on what you need to do for the book. And trust me, I know there's a million books that come out every year, but this is something that I think will resonate with the listeners here today, no matter what walk of life you're from. I think it's a book that anyone can resonate with, and it'll force you to really think about some inner thoughts that maybe you haven't necessarily thought about before. There's obviously a lot of sad moments in there, but there's also a lot of funny moments, a lot of happy moments, a lot of inspiration, a lot of joy. So, for anybody that's looking for some inspiration and motivation, make sure you go pick up Echoes of Stark Park at any major retailer, or log into the show notes and follow the directions, and you'll have your opportunity to get one for free.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you, Freddie. Thank you so much. It's been an enjoyable conversation. I appreciate you and your time.
Thanks for having me on. It was a blast.
Outstanding, outstanding. And folks, thank you so much for watching or listening to another episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. We'll catch you next time.